Today, we're going to tell you our top 10 tips for a successful school year for your child with ADHD.
Welcome to the ADHD Guys podcast with Mike McLeod of Grow Now ADHD and Ryan Wexelblatt of ADHD Dude. Learn about parenting kids with ADHD from two male licensed professionals who specialize in ADHD and executive functions. No fluffy parenting advice, only practical information that will help you help your child.
So both Ryan and I have worked in schools before in the past, so this is an episode that is very important to us. And this is a great thing to have with the school year right around the corner. So all these anxieties and worries when you go to the school or when you go to the store and you see back to school stuff already available for you. I was just in the supermarket. I saw Halloween stuff and back to school stuff. So it's right around the corner. It's coming. So here's some tips to make sure that this school year can be different than the previous ones.
So, Mike, before we get started, I think we should tell people a little bit about our school experience because I do think it makes a significant difference that we've both worked in schools. So I am a former school social worker. I still have my school social work certification. I primarily worked in private schools for students with learning differences or special education schools for students with behavior challenges. And I worked in schools for a long time. So that's my school experience.
Yeah, and so I have worked in multiple schools, public, private, and charter, as a speech and language pathologist in the past. And more recently, myself and my organization, we partner with schools so that myself and my team can be the executive function specialists on site at the school. So we partner with schools to provide ADHD and executive functioning services at schools. So I have a lot of experience with public, private, charter, and of course, my role now is I travel the country and internationally training schools in ADHD and executive functioning. So lots of experience with multiple schools all across the country.
All right, so let's get started with number one. Number one is do not toxify your relationship with your child over homework. So often, Mike and I work with families where we see the whole parent-child relationship becomes about homework completion. And not only is that not good for your relationship, but it's also not going to help your child necessarily do better academically. And it's certainly not a predictor of their future success. So, Mike, why don't you talk a little bit more about, because you focus more on executive functioning in your practice, talk a little bit more about what you share with families when they come to you and say, I can't get my child to do homework, or we're having battles around homework. And tell us what you share with families.
Yeah, so this is really the telltale sign of ADHD parenting. This is what you see time and time again, really in the vast majority of families we work with, is homework is in every single day, daily battle. And we see these parents, and most often it is the mothers doing this, of no longer playing the role of solely the parent, but now they're also the homework secretary and the education secretary, where they sit with the child, they have to double check what they have for homework every single day, go through their Google Classroom, their Schoology, their Canvas, see what's being done, and sort of just micromanage their academic performance and their homework performance. And what we share with parents is this is pretty much 99% of the time never successful. Nothing positive ever comes out of this. It'll toxify your relationship with your child. Your ADHD child at the end of the day loves the negative attention that they're getting, because if they can get into an hour argument with you, they're not doing their homework. They're just getting all the negative stimulation from you. So it's so important for parent coaching, for the parents and the moms to learn to back off. They have to learn for homework, number one, to be done in a different environment. So we have to find a way for homework to be done at school, at a library, at a different friend's house, anywhere where you are not there, so you can resist the temptation to not be involved. So that's always a huge tip, is back off, do less, and homework needs to be done somewhere else.
So to Mike's point, I want to share something. My son, when he was younger, was extremely oppositional and extremely argumentative. And one of the things his psychiatrist said to me early on was, do not do homework with him, stay out of this completely. And she said, get a college student to do homework with him. And that's exactly what I did. I got a college student who came and, did homework with him in the afternoons. And that was probably one of the best things ever, because she knew that if I would have gotten into it with him around homework, I would have completely toxified our relationship, and it would have created these big power battles. And to Mike's point, my son loves to argue. So it wouldn't have been good for our relationship at all. And that was some of the best money I ever spent was getting this college student to help with
That is fantastic advice. So if you happen to live near a college or a university, that's a really great thing, because those individuals that are college students, bachelor's level, master's level, are always looking for some kind of part-time odd jobs like that. And to have, an older person like that who's not seen as an adult or a parent, that's great. And that's something you talk about a lot in your parent courses, is sort of enlisting supporters. So ADHD parents not trying to do everything themselves and finding, some cheap labor at the end of the day to kind of help and be that person that could help them with homework and not the parent. That's great advice. So that's awesome that you had that happen.
So Mike, why don't we go to number 2?
Sure, absolutely. So another really great thing to do is what we just talked about, that whole idea of enlisting supporters. And I talk about this all the time, is ADHD parents are so stressed and so burnt out, they tend to think that everything they're dealing with, they're just dealing with themselves. They get this deep feeling of isolation, that they're dealing with such a difficult kid alone. What you really should do is reach out to the PTA group at your school or your local community Facebook group and find other parents that are also having these daily homework battles where it's toxifying your relationship. If you can find yourself a little homework pod for your child to work in a group of 1 other, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, whatever it may be, find a little homework pod for them to get together every single day after school and do homework together. So not only are they working as a team, they're practicing mental flexibility and social executive functioning in a natural, non-adult directed way, but they're able to use ADHD body doubling. They're able to watch other individuals work. They're not, sifting on Minecraft and YouTube and looking at inappropriate websites when they're just by themselves. They're together in a group, body doubling, working together. So reach out to your local community, find like-minded parents, and get your kids in a homework pod to get together for an hour every day after school.
And I'm going to suggest an alternative to that as well, in case that's not realistic for your family, which is this. You can, even if you're at work and let's say your child's at home, go on Zoom with them and have them do homework while you are on Zoom with them. So even if you're not necessarily watching them the whole time, at least they feel that you're watching them. And that's, another way to kind of replicate this body doubling. I mean, of course, I think it's better to do it in person, but I actually got this idea from a pretty prominent researcher in the ADHD field who shared with me that his son was away at college this past year. And every night, they would go on Zoom and he would do work and his son would be doing work. And he said it just helped his son a lot, get work done. So that's always another option as well, to do this through Zoom, whether it's you or with a grandparent, whoever, because if your child feels like, okay, somebody is here with me or at least watching me, that's going to help them stay on task. And one of the things I always teach kids is, when you can get homework done in a more efficient manner, that helps you have more time to yourself. So the way I always sell kind of executive function strategies with kids is about having more free time for themselves. I never bring up about grades or anything like that, because we need to have their buy-in somehow. And I always think that that's a good selling point, is having more free time to themselves at home.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think there's probably some parents listening to this thinking to themselves, my son's not going to agree to do that. He's just not going to log into the Zoom. He's going to turn the camera off. He's going to have all these behaviors. So what I would say to that is, okay, they're refusing to do what they're being told by their parent. So you take the Chromebook away. They lose access to their phone, their video games, or other preferred activity screens until they agree to do what they're told. You're not asking them to do hard manual labor. You're asking them to just be on Zoom with you while they do homework. So you remove all of those preferred things they enjoy until they are pretty much just doing what they're being asked.
All right. Number 3 is let your child communicate with their teachers rather than you communicating for them. So often I see parents speak for kids instead of teaching kids how to speak to teachers themselves. And what happens when parents do that is they deny the child the opportunity to develop self-advocacy skills. And often what I will see on the other end is teachers will go above kids' heads and will go to parents and say, Ryan didn't finish this homework from last night, rather than just telling the student themselves, you need to finish this. And I always say kids need to be held accountable by other people besides their parents. So if you are speaking to your child's teachers for them, hey, you're actually, with the best of intentions, you're doing them a disservice. So let me give you an example. Let's say your child couldn't finish homework and they got frustrated, and rather than you get into a big back and forth with it, you say, okay, just, let's not finish it tonight. What I tell parents is have your child email the teacher and say, I got frustrated tonight, I couldn't finish the homework, or I was having a hard time and homework didn't get finished. And you can type the email for them, okay? But let it be in their own words, because I think that means a lot when when you're teaching them to be accountable by saying to the teacher, here's what I couldn't get done. And again, it's teaching them self-advocacy skills.
And at the end of the day, you are enabling learned helplessness. And your ADHD child is going to love it that you're doing all of this stuff for them, because you're sending them the message, you don't have to do hard things. You don't have to self-advocate. You don't have to talk to your teacher. I'm going to do all of these things for them. So you sit back and watch your YouTube, and I'll talk to your teacher for you. So you're basically teaching your child that they're incapable. They can't do these hard, difficult things. And we're enabling learned helplessness overall. If something is happening between the teacher and the student, the student themselves needs to communicate that. Pretty much the ongoing theme we're going to be talking about today in this entire episode is parents have to do less. Do less, don't be involved, be a parent, stop getting involved with school stuff.
So, Mike, to your point, I wanted to mention that, I had worked at a private school for students with learning differences. It was a pretty pricey school. And one of the things there I would constantly see was a parent would reach out, to the teacher and say, Austin couldn't finish the homework last night. And this would go on through high school.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that, the faculty would talk about was that, this student is not going to be prepared to go to college because they've never developed self-advocacy skills. And I have to say that the school really tried to teach kids self-advocacy skills, but when their parents were just enabled their learned helplessness, by doing things like what you just described, it really did a disservice to a lot of the students. And we did see students who would go away to college and they were home pretty quickly because they never developed these self-advocacy skills.
100%. Yeah. For parents that are communicating to the teachers for the child, it is enabling learned helplessness and it is over accommodating the child. That's the biggest thing, is you're stepping in and you are inhibiting their independent skills. You are inhibiting their development of executive functions every time you step in and you make their school your school. So that's something that you need to watch out with. And you want your child to be able to embrace discomfort and to persevere through hard things. You need to do that as a parent too. So however much you want to get involved and you want to step in, you need to take a step back and let your child deal with it themselves.
And we need to teach kids to take ownership of their own success. And this becomes more important as they get older. So, all right, Mike, why don't we go to number 4?
So number 4 is one that I personally love. This is my favorite, is making after-school activities 100% mandatory. So this is something that I've seen become an ongoing trend over the past 10 years, is schools are pretty much offering more things after school than ever before. So if I was a student now in schools, I would love all the different things that were being offered in terms of sports and clubs and activities and all these great things. So much is being offered after school, but what parents are doing is they're going to their child and say, hey, do you want to do this do you want to sign up for this activity? And the kid instantly says no, especially if they have ADHD, instantly say no, and parents say, okay, then just come home after school, and just accepting the no right away at face value. Absolutely not. That can't happen. That is permissive parenting. Your child needs a strong, warm leader, and they need you to be authoritative, and you make after-school activities mandatory. And if your child continues to be non-compliant and has behaviors, guess what? That's when we reach out to the school and we let them know they are not to get on the bus after school. They are not getting on the bus. They are doing this activity Monday, this activity Tuesday, and so forth. If it's you who picks them up after school, guess what? You pick them up when the activity is over. You don't pick them up when school is over. So but that is one of the best things for ADHD kids to develop executive functions, is to be out of the house as much as possible. Be away from the parents as much as possible. Find ways for them to get homework done at school, after school, and then join clubs, activities, do extra help, be at the school, and come home as late as possible. Well, not necessarily as late as possible, but just be involved in the school community. So you as the parent set up the logistics of it in terms of the transportation and the school knowing, but they should be doing things after school every single day. And guess what? They're not going to like it at first, but after a couple of weeks, couple of months, they're going to be happy they're in it.
And we want to clarify, when Mike said they should be doing things every day, we don't mean overscheduling them and having, soccer one day and, music practice the next day, because that's not helpful actually to developing executive function skills. But one of the things I always teach is that kids need to feel connected to their community and their school community. So what I actually suggest is, they should be involved in one school activity at all times and one outside of school activity at all times. Ideally, one of those activities should be something physical, because we know physical activity is so important for kids with ADHD. So, to Mike's point, if they're doing an activity one day, then you're doing, your homework pod the next day or whatever it is, it's not about overscheduling kids. It's about having them participate in things where they feel connected to the community. And this is particularly important for kids who struggle socially, because if they're not getting invites to do things, with other kids, the way we develop executive function and social skills naturally is through unstructured play and hanging out. And granted, yes, these are structured activities we're talking about, okay? But anything is better than sitting at home playing Roblox or Minecraft. Okay, even if they're communicating with other kids, nothing can replicate real life interaction with your similar age peers.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of parents will confuse that with being overscheduled. And that's the way we have to remember it. The overscheduling is really when the parents are signing them up for all these tutoring, all these social skills, all these play therapy, all these, psychotherapies after school, and all these different structured tasks. Joining a sport after school, I love the schools that offer things like an outdoors club, and a lot of schools like to do this thing called like Girls on the Run now, where it's like, it's not a competitive like girls track team. It's just girls that go on walks together, and it's like a female group. Like those sort of just unstructured groups where it's child directed and they're just playing together. They're just being together. That's not going to increase the stress and anxiety that an overscheduling with tutors and therapies and social skills is going to bring. Just get them with their community and outside of the walls of the house as much as you can.
And Mike, before I get to number 5, I just want to make one last point about this, because you just made me think of something. A lot of parents are not going to like what I'm about to say here, but I think this is really important to hear. Stop with all the therapies after school, okay? They're not necessary. And if you don't believe me, please go check out the research. You can go to effectivechildtherapy.org to see what the research data shows, what works and what doesn't work for kids with ADHD. And what you will not find on there is talk therapy, play therapy, things like that. Okay? And, I'm a licensed mental health professional. I'm not anti-therapy, but we see, Mike, so many kids who are, one day they're at, play therapy, the next day they're at OT, the next day, they're at social skills group. Stop with all these therapies. The most helpful thing you can do for them is not to have them in therapy, but what we were just talking about, have them in activities with their peers.
Correct. So if you really want to look to see your child's executive functions get strengthened, their anxiety decrease, their social executive functions strengthen, then the best way to do it really is after school activities and unstructured outdoor play. And the reason you don't see social media influencers talking about that is because nobody makes money when kids play outside. And most after-school activities are free. They're part of the tuition or part of, being part of a public school. So these are things that people are not making money off of, so they're not being pushed on social media like other sign up for my program kind of thing, or sign up for this therapy. So you really want to take advantage of your child's childhood and unstructured play and unstructured time before they turn 18 and go off into the real world. You need to get them involved in their communities.
And, the last thing to mention about this is I think we live in a therapy-obsessed culture right now. And I find particularly, I don't mean to pick on them, but particularly mothers have a propensity to think that, the more therapy there is, the better. And there's just no evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, the evidence shows quite the opposite of that. Now, one last thing I want to bring up about this. If your child needs some kind of academic remediation, whether that's tutoring or whether it's executive function treatment like they do at Grow Now, that is something that they need. That's not what we consider, therapy, where they're sitting around and talking about, coping skills or, emotional regulation, because what the research data shows is those things do not carry over right into, real life. Whereas the research data does show that, tutoring or executive function treatment are evidence-based and they can be helpful. So
yeah, and just to very simply put that, there was a recent book that talked about this, and this is a very unique way to phrase it to families, is we talk about all the time that kids are not fragile, they're anti-fragile. So yes, bad things happen to kids and they go through difficult experiences like we all do. But kids are anti-fragile. They go through tough times, they persevere through it, and they move on. What the research tells us is when they go to talk therapy and they talk about their negative experiences and they ruminate on it, it actually increases the anxiety and makes things worse. So we have to remember, kids are anti-fragile. They don't need to talk about their feelings and their experiences in order to process them.
All right, number 5, written agendas. So one of the things we really suggest is that all kids use written agendas rather than checking homework on a homework portal, because when they have to write down their homework in school, it's activating their nonverbal working memory, or what we call future thinking skills. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I have to write down, that I have social studies homework. Well, then at the end of the day, when I'm packing up, and if I look at my agenda, if I remember to do it, then I'm thinking about, okay, I need to bring home, my social studies book, or I need to bring this home. When you check homework after you get home, you're not using any of that nonverbal working memory. So it is really helpful in terms of executive function skill development, for kids to use agendas or planners, whatever you want to call them, and write the homework down at school. And in my executive function crash course, one of the sections, I showed 2 planners that I recommend for kids with ADHD, because they just tend to be more comprehensive and more user-friendly than the school planners, that schools tend to give out. So many kids, particularly, as they get older, they are resistant to doing this. Some of them might want to take, a picture of the homework, or they might, whatever it is. But again, the most important thing is that they are, getting the homework in school, not checking after school. All right. Because it's going to help with that executive function school development. And the other part of this is for older kids, like something I see parents do a lot is they tell kids what they have for homework. That is one of the least helpful things you can do, because when you tell your child what they have for homework, they're not using those planning skills, that, nonverbal working memory, when we have to visualize ourselves doing something in the future. So please do not tell your kids what they have for homework. They need to figure out what they have for homework.
Yeah, so if you're a teacher listening, one of the best things that you can do for a lot of the schools we consult with is make this, a 1, 2, 3 minute activity at the end of every period or every class. Make it so even if your school utilizes the Chromebook and the Google Classroom, whatever, you can still find a way to bring paper and pen agenda style into your class. So at the end of every class, everyone take out your agenda, take out a piece of paper, whatever it may be, even if it has to be a shared Google Doc with everybody. Find something where at the end of the class, everybody is writing down, paper to pen, what is due for homework. So try to find a way to still incorporate agendas. There's enough research to show your school board, your superintendent, whatever it is, that pen to paper, kids seeing it in their own handwriting is still incredibly beneficial to them. And just make it a routine every single day. And then the kids are going to get used to it. In the beginning of the year, you can pair them in peers, pair them in groups so they can hold each other accountable to writing it down. So you don't have the 2, 3 kids with ADHD in the class just ignoring the prompts. Get them with a peer to do it, to write it down. And then by the time, Halloween, Thanksgiving time in the school year, you should certainly expect the kids to be doing this independently and just taking their agenda out. They know it's a time, they're used to it. They've been through it enough where it becomes an independent skill. And I guarantee you, many of them will continue to do it years after, in college, in jobs, writing things down as a skill they learn early on.
And one last point about this, those homework portals are the worst things ever, because number one, again, they inhibit executive function skill development, but they're also inconsistent. So one teacher uses it, the other one doesn't use it for 3 days, the other one doesn't use it at all. So they're really not helpful, with anything we're talking about here at those homework portals. So just keep that in mind. All right, Mike, what do we have for number 6?
For number 6, we have, so in terms of that homework, being done on that Chromebook. So Ryan and I talk all the time about this Chromebook and ed tech and those sorts of things. And we know that homework after school is a massive fight every single day. And it's only gotten worse with this Chromebook. Chromebooks have really done a real disservice to our students and our schools. And every day after school, the Chromebook is a fight because it's technology for our ADHD kids. Schools refuse to put limits on the Chromebooks. So what we see now with these ADHD kids doing is when they're supposed to be doing homework, they're on YouTube, and then they end up sitting in their room with their Chromebook for hours, just doing things for pleasure instead of school stuff. And they're just surfing the web, playing games all night on their school-issued technology. So what you're going to want to do with this Chromebook is have very clear limits around it. So you want to have one specific area of the house where the Chromebook is allowed, at a kitchen table, a dining room table, where it is in plain sight. And the Chromebook never leaves that specific area of the house, period. It is never allowed in your child's room. They're not allowed to pick it up and move it around. It gets plugged in to the outlet in the kitchen, in the dining room, and it is to never be unplugged, and it is to never leave that table, period. And then what we tend to see with kids is they'll rush through their homework or lie and say they have none so they can do what they want on the Chromebook. So what I recommend to all parents to do, depending on age, you can look at the time limit here, but have a very specific time frame of time where the child has access to the Chromebook. So let's say, for example, 1 hour after school. So from 4 to 5, you have access to the Chromebook to do your homework. Once 5 o'clock hits, whether they say they're done or whether they don't say they're done, it doesn't matter. At 5 o'clock, you are taking that Chromebook. And you can communicate this to the teacher, is you're limiting technology in the home. So there may be days where he doesn't get all his homework done because you're teaching your child to utilize that hour of doing homework only, not surfing the web and looking at YouTube. So once 5 o'clock hits, you take that Chromebook and you don't give it back to them until the morning when they're going back to school.
That's great advice. And, I imagine like some parents are listening to this now and, thinking, well, my middle schooler or my high schooler likes to do homework in their room. Okay, well, those days are over. And
Correct.
Again, here's the selling point. When they're doing homework in their room, they're switching screens. All right. And you have to help them understand that they are taking away their own free time because they are making homework take so much longer by constantly getting distracted. And it's not their fault they're getting distracted. I mean, I have a saying, the definition of insanity is giving a kid with ADHD a distraction and then expecting them not to get distracted. So by doing this, help them understand that, this isn't because we don't trust you. It's because we want you to finish your homework in a time efficient manner so you have more free time to yourself. So then again, it's about you selling them on, the more free time rather than, trying to say to them, well, I don't trust you. So.
Yeah, and that's a perfect natural consequence that does not involve any language, period. So at 5 o'clock hits, a little alarm goes off if you want to or whatever, or you can just go up to your child and say it's 5 o'clock. You walk up to them, you close the Chromebook, and then it's yours. It's yours until the next morning when it's time to go back to school. You don't have to lecture them. You don't have to talk to them. If they complain, I still have homework. Well, too bad. Tomorrow, don't watch so many YouTube videos at 4 o'clock and get started at 4:55.
All right, number 7, it is not your child's teacher's job to manage your anxiety. And I want to tell a little story about this because I think it would be helpful. So a few years ago, I had a meeting with a parent who was a member of my membership site. And, she started saying to me, well, I sent his teacher, your videos from YouTube, and I, sent her the Declarative Language Handbook by Linda Murphy and all this. And I said to her, stop sending the teacher my videos. It is not her job to watch my videos. And it is not her job to, figure out exactly how your child's brain works. This is a parent, the child was in public school, and I said, this teacher has, 25 students in the class, whatever, however many of them have 504 plans and IEPs, and teachers do not get training in, executive functioning or ADHD or anything like that. So by you trying to push this on her, you're kind of, you're trying to manage your anxiety through her, and that's not fair to the teacher. So please stop doing that. And she said afterwards, she said, you know what, I feel a lot better now. And it's actually a relief to hear you say that because now I don't feel like, I have to kind of, keep staying on top of her like that because, I'm worried about my son's academic performance. And I also said to her, because he was like going into 8th grade or something, I said, at what point do you require him to start taking ownership of his success rather than you trying to micromanage his success for him?
Absolutely. And one conversation I love to have with parents is kind of like how we all look to like the one president of the United States as the person that does everything, and we ignore every other politician and realize that it's a whole system of a government. It's the same kind of thing at schools. It's not just the individual teacher. That teacher is under so much red tape. Schools today are just filled with red tape from superintendents and principals and all the other parents, all the other students. And they're on lunch duty, they're on bus duty, they're being thrown into IEP meetings, 504 meetings, teachers now having to go to court for due process. One of the best things ADHD parents can do when they feel frustrated is Google the teacher pay scale in your specific area. These teachers are overworked, they are underpaid, And at the end of the day, executive functioning and ADHD training is not part of their training to work in a school. And that's to no fault of their own. When you're getting a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, you can't just show up one day and say, hey, professor, teach me about executive functioning, please. You can't tell the professors what to teach you unless the school is specifically trained by a true ADHD executive functioning professional. That school probably just thinks that executive functioning is time management and organization, and let's organize your backpacks and your folders. And ADHD is just hyperactivity and inattentiveness. They're not given the most up-to-date research. They probably think that CBT is the best thing for your kid. It's very hard for these teachers to know because they don't have the training, and at the end of the day, they are very highly overworked and have so much going on.
And Mike, I just want to add something to this because, as a school social worker, I served on, well, at least in New Jersey, it's called the Child Study Team, which is, comprised of the school social worker, counselor, learning specialist, and school psychologist. And one of the things I also want parents to understand is that the support staff in your school, such as social workers and counselors, school does not give them opportunities to do outside trainings much. All right. Yeah. And they're certainly not going to fund these more expensive trainings that Mike and I have done. So please keep that in mind as well. It's not just the teachers who are not getting training, it's also the support staff. And if you have an issue with that, don't go to the teacher, rather go to the administration and say, look, I really think it would be helpful, if the school had some training in ADHD, and you can, give us a plug, say, please check out the ADHD Guys podcast, and Mike and I can come to the district and do a training. So that's always something to keep in mind as well.
Absolutely. And we can meet our listeners, and that'd be a great thing.
Yes, we can. Yes.
That'd be awesome.
All right, Mike, what is tip number 8?
So for number 8, what we're going to talk about here are IEP goals. And it's very important for parents to be realistic about different IEP goals, especially in the areas of executive functioning and social skills. So what many parents have kind of been taught is every single area of need, every single concern needs to have a specific goal for it. So now these kids have huge IEPs, huge 504s with multiple goals. So we never end up seeing progress in any areas because the kids have so many goals. But like we said earlier, when it comes to executive functioning, most schools, most teachers, most support staff really don't have the training to work on executive functioning. So what we do is we see these schools do these executive functioning labs or executive functioning classes, which is the organizing folders and backpacks, and it's all these external executive functions that go nowhere and keep the kids prompt dependent on that class, on that teacher. So that's certainly not going to help. And then when it comes to social skills, once again, schools really don't have the resources, the manpower, the time. So what do? They throw your kids into a lunch bunch. They throw them into a highly adult-directed social skills group and different things like that, where they're really not practicing real-world social skills and social executive functioning skills. They're throwing them into these adult-directed groups simply because the parents needed a goal for it.
So I want to clarify for people. So a 504 plan, you have accommodations, not goals. Okay. So when people ask, sometimes they'll say, well, what are the best accommodations for kids with ADHD? And this is not like a cookie cutter thing, but to Mike's point, he just said, what you need to be thinking about when it comes to 504 accommodations is this accommodation going to keep my child prompt dependent on adults? Or is it going to help them cultivate independence because we want kids to be independent learners? Okay, so things like, preferential seating, to help them focus more, that's fine. All right, but things like, the teacher handing them, the homework every day in a resource room, that is something that is keeping kids prompt dependent. So I don't have any problem with kids going to like a resource room or, that period during the day where teachers help them organize stuff a little bit, but we have to be realistic. Again, it's not helping them develop executive function skills. It's helping them to get organized, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with that support, but it's not executive function skill building. As for the social piece, I want to mention that in the past month, I have had 5 parents ask me, between individual appointments and my membership site office hours about, what social goals should my child have in their IEP? And what I say to them is, it's a little bit irrelevant if you want me to be honest with you, because teachers do not have training in this. All right. And, they can say, well, we're going to put them in a social skills group and we'll work on, this or that. But again, if they have no training, then what are you really expecting? And the other part of this, keep in mind, is that what the research data shows is that social skills groups are a complete waste of time for kids with ADHD. all right, and they're not getting anything out of them. So if the school really wants to help your child, socially, what you can say to them is, what would be most helpful is if you could do push-in, meaning the guidance counselor or whoever it is comes into class, and helps your child in class, or even better, and this is, instead of a child going to lunch bunch, which, is basically a social skills group, and as Mike said, with adult direction, go outside and help them during recess. Because this is one of the biggest problems with kids in elementary school is that they can function fine in structured social situations or semi-structured, but where they struggle is things like recess. And that's why I have a saying that for kids with ADHD, often recess is the hardest school subject for them. So what I'm saying right now, this is outside of what schools typically do. And they're going to look at you if you bring this up and say, we don't do that. Okay. Yep. And you can say to them, well, is it possible that, rather than, my son or daughter going to lunch bunch, that the counselor can go outside and, help the kids during recess there? Or again, go into the classroom and help them there, because that is going to be a lot more effective, because as we know, kids with ADHD learn in the moment. So they have to be taught in the moment. And again, this is actually why individual therapy is not a recommended, when I say individual therapy, counseling, talk therapy, play therapy, why they're not recommended treatments for kids with ADHD, because they're not being taught in the moment. And same with social skills. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. And one thing I've heard from IEP meetings I've attended is a lot of the schools tend to say, he just likes to be alone. He likes to, he's an introvert. He likes to be by himself. He doesn't like all the structured, constant play of, that's happening during recess. But you have to kind of dig a little bit deeper there. Okay, are you just letting him be on his phone the whole time? Are you letting him play on his Chromebook during unstructured time? Is there an esports gaming room they can go escape to during unstructured time? All these different things that these schools are the schools are basically being permissive and letting kids take the easy route. So by helping a kid at recess, what you can do is you can say no phones, no Chromebook, no gaming room, go out there and model to them how to get involved and help them. Yes, we're not forcing relationships. Yes, you're not doing these kinds of things, but we're getting them out of their comfort zone. That's not what social skills groups do. That's what unstructured play does.
Yeah. And, that's actually one of the reasons I have an elementary school program I did during the school year called How to Do Recess, for this very reason, because the kids are not getting the support during recess that they need to learn how to play and interact appropriately. And for older kids, often what do they do, particularly kids with ADHD who struggle with, social executive function skills? As Mike was saying, they just go on their phone, or they go on their Chromebook, during lunch or recess or whatever it is. And that is so not helpful to them. Like, I actually found out that the school I used to work at, the one that I mentioned before, this is a school where there's a lot of kids with autism as well as ADHD. And they now have like a gaming room that the kids can go to during recess. Or the break during lunch. And that is the least helpful thing for this group of kids, to allow them to be in front of screens when they're around peers, and could be interacting with them. And now they're just, isolating themselves in school. Like, they don't do that enough outside of school to begin with.
Correct. And we see a lot of schools kind of going in this direction for those non-sporty kids. How can they get involved in some sort of team-based, competitive-based thing? And now with the rise of gaming, we see these Super Smash Brothers clubs and Mario Kart clubs and different things like that for esports. A lot of schools are going in an esports direction. If your child has ADHD and some sort of tech addiction, be very wary of these groups. Is it always better for your child to play video games physically around other peers than by themselves? Sure, but you need to make it very clear to the school staff, my child is not to access these video games unless it's structured esports time, not during any unstructured time. Because what these ADHD kids will do is they will manipulate the parents into thinking, I have to practice. I need my practice time. I need to go play Smash Brothers as much as I can so I can compete. And after school, I got to play for a bunch of hours so I can practice. Like if you're a football player, I'm going to go practice and run laps and throw balls around. But, I got to go play Smash Brothers all the time, which is ridiculous. So you still have to limit it even if they join esports.
One of the things that I often suggest for kids who don't like sports is I tell parents, get them a little travel chess set that they can bring to school. Because particularly for boys, there's always guys who like to play chess, or for girls, whatever game that they're into now. I'm not really sure because I don't work with many girls. But, let them bring a little travel game, or let them bring a Frisbee or something to school. if they go outside during recess. So, if they don't want to play football or basketball or whatever it is, they could do something enjoyable. And that's also a way of bringing other kids in, because they could say, hey, do you want to throw the Frisbee around? Or, do you want to play chess? So just keep that in mind as well.
Absolutely, yeah. If you go to Dick's Sporting Goods, you can get some like those backyard games. Anyone can play cornhole. Anyone can play spike ball, or that game where you throw the Frisbee at the bottle. Any of those kinds of things. There's so many different just outdoor games, can jam, Frisbee. It's there. You don't have to be athletic.
I'm laughing something like they're going to bring cornhole to school.
Every school should. I work at a lot of schools that have cornhole now. They have cornhole. They have Frisbee golf sets. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cornhole is amazing. Cornhole is a really, really popular thing now.
So, look, your kid's not going to bring a cornhole set to school, but you can say to school, hey, do you have some things that are like not, these, kind of more contact games like football or basketball? And that's a great idea.
Yeah. Even like those gigantic, like Connect 4 sets, like life size, like just different like schools and their playground areas should look like almost like a barbecue that adults have. Have the cornhole, have those sorts of things. Bring it up at your next PTA meeting. Let's get the kids out and playing. Yeah.
All right. Tip number 9: keep a good relationship with your child's teachers. I cannot emphasize this enough. One of the worst things parents can do is develop a contentious relationship with a teacher. And that contentious relationship can also come about if you tend to be highly anxious and are trying to micromanage your child's school career. That is putting stress on a teacher. One of the things I always explain to parents is this, that, I think most teachers are altruistic, really good people who are very invested in kids. And if you develop a contentious relationship with your teacher, particularly because your child complains about them or they don't like them, and you start, becoming combative with the teacher or start, telling on them constantly about things, there's a good chance that teacher is going to keep their distance from your child. That doesn't mean they're not going to be professional, but they might not be as invested, in your child as they would if they knew that you were supportive of them. Because when teachers know that, parents can be difficult or challenging, they tend to keep their distance from kids a little more because they don't want to have to deal with that. And one of the things I want to mention is, my colleague is a middle school special ed teacher. And one of the things, he said to me is, every year, that week before the students come, when, we're meeting and they're going over the students' IEPs and everything, one of the things that happens every year is they talk about those, 3 or 5 parents who are going to take up all of everybody's time. So please know that, if you have a history of, having contentious relationships with the teacher or the school, you have been flagged. And this is not to say that they're saying horrible things about you, but you're going to be known to the staff, all right, as somebody who makes life more difficult to the faculty, and that's not helpful to your child in the long run.
Yeah, and that's a lot of information that I think a lot of people can really take to heart. And it may sound a little jarring to hear you have been flagged, but let's be honest, you're telling someone else how to do their job. And if someone came to your job and told you how to do yours, you wouldn't like that very much either. And we're talking about teachers here who, as we have said continuously, they are overworked and underpaid, and they're working with a lot more kids than just yours. So, do your very best to keep a positive professional relationship with them. And that's just going to work out better for your child in the long run. No matter how stressed or upset you get with them, find ways to interact with them appropriately. Blaming them for your child's grades, their shortcomings, their behaviors, any sort of environment or response they have. Teachers are under far too difficult of a microscope these days. So we want to work more with them than against them.
And let them know that you appreciate them, because that goes a long way with teachers. You don't have to buy them anything, but just send them a quick email. Let them know that you appreciate them, okay? Because that really means a lot to them. Very last thing I want to mention about this. It is very common, particularly for kids with ADHD, to go home and complain about their teachers or, tell a story about something that happened in class that might not be factually accurate. All right. And why do kids with ADHD do this? One, because they like to get an emotional reaction from their parents, because, kids with ADHD are novelty seeking, and getting an emotional reaction from their parents is a form of novelty for some kids. For other kids, it's because they, want to feel in control, and they know that if they complain or tell a story about how the teacher was mean to them, the parent's going to be reactive and come back to them, and that gives them, a brief sense of power. So my point being is, for many of you, you have to take what your kids say about school or an incident that happened in school with a teacher with a grain of salt, because their perception of a situation may not be accurate, or you may only be getting half the story. And particularly for kids who struggle with social executive function skills, particularly perspective taking, often their perception of something due to their perspective taking challenges is distorted. I used to see this all the time with kids, who have pretty significant social executive function challenges. Let me give you one example, actually. So I worked with a boy for years. He was diagnosed with Asperger's, not ASD level 1. He was diagnosed with Asperger's because of his age. And his mom just happened to be a special ed teacher. And he would come home and say things like, Mrs. Smith was screaming at me in class and, this and that. And thank God that his mom, knew better than this. And she knew that, this teacher was firm. And, she was firm, but she was fair. And she would say to him, hey, Chris, this needs to get done. Well, Chris would come home and, his recollection of this was being screamed at. Well, he wasn't being screamed at. She was holding him accountable. So maybe that felt like being screamed at to him. But again, his mom knew, right, that his perception or the way he, communicated stories was not always accurate. And often it was through this lens of, how he was feeling at the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point to make. And, these ADHD kids are, pros at really pulling at those heartstrings and sort of deflecting accountability. So I can't tell you how many times I've come across that and it's so hard for the parents to hear. It's so hard for the parents to hear that the teacher was yelling or blaming or singling you out, or everyone was so mean to me, or, all these things, all these negative things happened to me. And it's just not accurate. And sometimes it's not the kid's fault. Sometimes it's the lack of perspective taking and the lack of hindsight and the lack of working memory, sure. But, as a parent, please just take that information. If you need to have a conversation with the teacher, you certainly can to get, realistic information. But don't take those stories and get filled with rage and go talk to the teacher. Take it, process it, take some time. If you have to have a conversation, go ahead. If not, give your child the language to go have a conversation with the teacher themselves.
And what I actually suggest for parents is, rather than going to the teacher and asking them for their recollection of things, ask the counselor, because it feels like less pressure, if you go through the counselor than if you go to the teacher directly. So just keep that in mind. All right, our final tip, number 10, Mike, what is it?
So for number 10, it's so important for parents to understand your child is going to have teachers they are not going to like. So coincidentally, as your child gets older and goes through the grades and more independence is needed from them, and they're going to have to do more on their own and, keep a locker, keep an agenda, keep a backpack, whatever it may be, they're also now going to have multiple teachers. It's not just one teacher for every subject. It's not just one teacher for everything. Now they have different teachers for every different subjects as they get older. So there's going to be multiple personalities. There's probably going to be some older, more old school teachers. I tend to hear from parents, oh, I love when my child gets a young, cool teacher that just gets it. Chances are your child's at some point going to have an older veteran teacher who has lots of experience and is very set in their ways, quote unquote. So it's very important for parents to understand not every match is going to be a match made in heaven. And it's a lot of parents' natural instinct, oh, we need to change teachers, or we need to get this done, or we need to make lots of changes. Eventually, you're going to want your child to be able to have a job where they're going to work with a team of people. And guess what? They're not going to like everybody there either. And you're not going to be able to call a meeting to have that person they don't like at their job change their personality to benefit your child. So you want your child to have the mental flexibility and the coping skills to work with someone who doesn't match their personality. It's not the teacher's job to change. It's not the teacher's job to do all these things. We want your child to be flexible and learn, because the same thing's going to happen at college. They're going to get a professor they're not going to like, and they're going to have to work extra hard to go to office hours and get to know the person personally to really aid that relationship. So once again, as a parent, do less, let your child handle it, and let your child build that relationship themselves to get to know this teacher after they may have gotten off on the wrong foot.
And keep in mind that learning to deal with people who you don't like or who you don't click with, that helps develop resiliency. So, when I hear parents, demand that a child changes classes because they don't like the teacher, that is denying them an opportunity to develop resiliency. And again, if you lack resiliency in life, that's going to be a major problem. All right. So please keep in mind that, again, This is going to happen for some of you this year. Your child's going to have a teacher they don't like. They might have multiple teachers they don't like. But what we can do is we can help them learn how to deal with it. And we can help them learn that it's not the biggest deal in the world and this is temporary. And one of the suggestions I always make to parents is this: do not spend hours and hours talking about the teacher who your child doesn't like. And if they come home and vent about them and say, Mr. Smith did this today or whatever, it's just saying, okay, I hear you. I understand why you could feel that way. But don't get into lengthy discussions about it, because the more energy you give it, the more it's going to feed them. It's going to feed their complaining about them, and it's going to feed their frustration. And you don't want to feed their frustration by constantly talking about it. As we mentioned before, often talking about things constantly with kids or talking about their feelings doesn't help them. It actually makes things worse.
And definitely don't say negative things about the teacher or about the school in front of your child, because that's you modeling trash talking, and that's you modeling negative talk about someone else. So, as a parent, what's very important as an ADHD parent to manage your emotions and always model your self-regulation. Make sure you're not bashing the school in front of your child.
Mike, you just made me think of something I want to bring up. So I was in a special needs, parent group for the community where, we used to live. And one of the things in this group was that, parents would often say, did anybody's child have, Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith, or, my child has, Mrs. whoever, and I really don't like her in this or that. And I eventually spoke up in the group and I said, you know what, can you all consider that maybe, one of these teachers who you're trash talking, maybe they have a family member in this group, or maybe they're going to hear about this and this is going to be really devastating to them to know that you're publicly shaming them in a group. So knock it off. And of course, many of them got defensive because, for a lot of them, everything was about, how do I keep my child happy at all times? And the last thing I want to say is this, the more you try to keep your child happy, the more unhappy they're going to be as an adult.
Yeah. And as a parent, do your very best to be very careful with social media. One thing I've noticed time and time again about those specific kinds of posts, when a parent's saying, hey, does anyone know about this teacher or this therapist or this? One thing that I notice every time about those kinds of posts is someone will say, hey, has anyone had Mr. Smith, the therapist, or Mr. Smith, the teacher? And there'll be 15 to 20 positive comments. Oh, he was great. I loved him. He was amazing. And all those positive comments, they might get a like or whatever. And then one person will say, oh, we had Mr. Smith. He was terrible. He was so mean to my son. And that one negative comment will get all the attention. There'll be 15 different replies just to that one negative comment, and everyone ignores all the positive things Mr. Smith has done. And the one parent who had one slight bad interaction with Mr. Smith gets all the attention and bashes his entire reputation.
All right, so we're wishing everybody a good school year this year. Hope your kids have a lot of success. And please feel free to tell others about the ADHD Guys podcast, and we will speak to you soon.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about Mike's practice, Grow Now ADHD, please visit his website at grownowadhd.com. To learn about the services Ryan provides, please visit adhddude.com. You can find Mike on Instagram at grownowadhd, and you can find Ryan at the ADHD Dude YouTube channel. The ADHD Guys podcast and content posted by either Grow Now ADHD or ADHD Dude is presented solely for general informational and educational purposes. The use of information on this podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, licensed mental health professional, or other qualified professional, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining professional advice for any medical or mental health condition they or their child may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.